Hello and welcome. Welcome to Oak Tree English's poetry live stream. Yesterday I tried to do this and utterly failed. The reason for the unusual headgear is because I'm going to take you through British history, specifically English history, from Rome to the Tudors in verse. This may shut down again, so forgive me if that happens, but we'll give it a shot. So here we go. I'm going to start with Rudyard Kipling because he's awesome. And he wrote exceedingly good poems. And we're reading the Roman Centurion's Song. The gate. I had the news last night. My cohort ordered home. By ship to Portus Itius, and thence by road to Rome. I've marched the companies aboard. The arms are stowed below. Now let another take my sword. Command me not to go. I've served in Britain 40 years, from Vectis to the wall. I have none other home than this, nor any life at all. Made. And again. Here where men say my name was made, here where my work was done, here where my dearest dead are laid, my wife and son. Here where time, custom, grief, and toil, age, memory, service, love have rooted me in British soil. Ah, how can I remove? For me, this land, that sea, these airs, those folk and fields suffice. What purple southern pomp can match our changeful northern skies? Black with December snows unshed, or pearled with August haze. The clanging arch of steel grey March, or June's long lighted days. You'll follow winding Rhodanus, till vine and olive lean, aslant before the sunny breeze that sweeps Nemausus clean. To Arelati's triple gate, but let me linger on, here where our stiff-necked British oaks confront Euroclydon. You'll take the old Aurelian road through shore-descending pines, where, blue as any peacock's neck, the Tyrrhene ocean shines. You'll go where laurel crowns are won, but will you e'er forget a marsh to drain, a road to make, or native troops to drill? Some western camp, I know the picked, or granite border keep, mid seas of heather derelict, where our old messmates sleep. Legate, I come to you in tears, my cohort ordered home. I've served in Britain 40 years, what should I do in Rome? Here is my heart, my soul, my mind, the only life I know. I cannot leave it all behind. Command me not to go. The Romans occupied Britain for around about 400 years. Caesar came, he saw, and he went back home again. And then Claudius got the job done. And they stuck around until, well, the fall of Rome. And whatever caused that is a subject for discussion for greater minds than my own. But the Romans eventually left, as we just heard, and we were plunged into the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages was a time of various invading groups, Angles, Saxons, Celts, unless you possibly are. This is what happened yesterday. And we're back, apparently. And this was the time when King Arthur was doing his stuff, if he was real. There's some interesting evidence for his reality. Go down to Cornwall and go to the Vale of Avalon Visitor Centre, and you can have a walk around and visit a stone with an inscription of Arthur, saying that this is the place where he fell. And it's been dated to very early, much earlier than the legend. or much earlier than we would expect. And one of the people who went to visit it was a chap called Alfred Lord Tennyson. And he wrote a poem about this era called The Lady of Shalott. I've read it before. It's good. It deserves another reading. On either side the river lie long fields of barley and of rye that clothe the wold and meet the sky, and through the field the road runs by to many-towered Camelot. Willows whiten, aspens quiver, little breezes dusk and shiver through the wave that runs forever by the island in the river, flowing down to Camelot. 4 grey walls and 4 grey towers overlook a space of flowers, and the silent isle embowers the Lady of Shalott. By the margin, willow-veiled, slide the heavy barges trailed by slow horses, and unhailed the shallop flitteth silken-sailed, skimming down to Camelot. But who hath seen her wave her hand, or at the casement seen her stand? Or is she known in all the land, the Lady of Shalott? Only reapers reaping early, in among the bearded barley, hear a song that echoes cheerly from the river, winding clearly down to towered Camelot. And by the moon, the reaper weary, piling sheaves in uplands airy, listening, whispers, "Ah, 'tis the fairy Lady of Shalott." There she waves by night and day, a magic web with colours gay. She has heard a whisper say, a curse is on her if she stay to look down to Camelot. And moving through a mirror clear that hangs before her all the year, shadows of the world appear. There she sees the highway near, winding down to Camelot. There the river eddy whirls, and there the surly village churls, and the red cloaks of market girls pass onward from Shalott. Sometimes a troop of damsels glad, an abbot on an ambling pad, sometimes a curly shepherd lad, or long-haired page in crimson clad, goes by to towered Camelot. And sometimes, through the mirror blue, the knights come riding, 2 and 2. She hath no loyal knight and true, the Lady of Shalott. But in her web she still delights to weave the mirror's magic sights, for often, through the silent nights, a funeral with plumes and lights and music went to Camelot. Or when the moon was overhead, came 2 young lovers, lately wed. I am half sick of shadows, said the Lady of Shalott. A bowshot from her bower eaves, he rode between the barley sheaves. The sun came dazzling through the leaves, and flamed upon the field. A red-crossed knight for ever kneeled to a lady in his shield, that sparkled on the yellow field, beside remote Shalott. The gemmy bridle glittered free, like to some branch of stars we see, hung in the golden galaxy. The bridal bells rang merrily as he rode down to Camelot. And from his blazoned baldric slung a mighty silver bugle hung, and as he rode his armour rung beside remote Shalott. All in the blue unclouded weather, thick jewelled shone the saddle leather. The helmet and the helmet feather burned like one burning flame together as he rode down to Camelot. As often through the purple night, below the starry clusters bright, some bearded meteor trailing light moves over still Shalott. His broad clear brow in sunlight glowed, on burnished hooves his warhorse trode, from underneath his helmet flowed his coal-black curls, as on he rode down to Camelot. From the bank and from the river He flashed into the crystal mirror. Tiraloom. She left the web. She left the loom. She made 3 paces through the room. She saw the water lily bloom. She saw the helmet and the plume. She looked down to Camelot. Out flew the web and floated wide. The mirror cracked from side to side. The curse is come upon me, cried the Lady of Shalott. In the stormy east wind straining, the pale yellow woods were waning, the broad stream in his banks complaining, heavily the low sky raining, overtowered Camelot. Down she came and found a boat, beneath a willow left afloat, and round about the prow she wrote, the Lady of Shalott. And down the river's dim expanse, like some bold seer in a trance, seeing all his own mischance, with a glassy countenance did she look to Camelot. And at the closing of the day, she loosed the chain, and down she lay. The broad stream bore her far away, light through the noises. Lying robed in snowy white, that loosely flew to left and right, the leaves upon her falling light, through the noises of the night, she floated down to Camelot. And as the boathead wound along, the willowy hills and fields among, they heard her singing her last song, the Lady of Shalott. Heard a carol, mournful, holy, chanted loudly, chanted lowly, till her blood was frozen slowly, and her eyes were darkened wholly, turned to towered Camelot. For ere she reached upon the tide, the first house by the waterside, singing in her song, she died, the Lady of Shalott. Under tower and balcony, by garden wall and gallery, a gleaming shape she floated by, dead pale between the houses high, silent into Camelot. Out upon the wharfs they came, knight and burgher, lord and dame, and round the prow they read her name, the Lady Fear, or the knights at Camelot. But Lancelot mused a little space. He said, she has a lovely face. God in his mercy lend her grace, the Lady of Shalott. Don't worry, I've finished now. That's Shalott. Thank you for sticking with me through that. I know I've read it before, but it's a very good poem. Very good poem. Interesting point on rhyme. Some of you are interested. Most of you are probably not. There's a bit in that works better in a Lincolnshire accent. He was, of course, as you know, outside Lincoln Cathedral. There's a big statue of Tennyson. So if we think about and down the river's dim expanse, like some bold seer in a trance, seeing all his own mischance with a glassy countenance, Midook. Yes, it sort of possibly works a little bit better in a Lincolnshire accent because they've got the short A instead of the R of RP. I think I speak with RP, though I have been told that it is a myth and that RP, that is received pronunciation, doesn't actually exist in reality. I leave that to the me once who gave me a job because I said, well, yeah, I speak with RP. he sort of laughed and chuckled and gave me a job, which I was very grateful for. It's a good job. I met my wife there. Another story. Right. After the Romans left, we went into the Dark Ages. After the Dark Ages, we ended up with French kings and queens. notably William the Conqueror. I went out with my daughter the other day. She's 4, and we went collecting conkers. And she said, "There's a conqueror, and there's a conqueror." And she'd obviously been watching too much horrible histories. "Oh, I'm William the Conqueror, my Henry stood no chance." Yeah, conquerors. Anyway, the end of that line, really, the last of the Norman kings, was a chap who persecuted people like Robin Hood. I've been to Lincolnshire now and go to Nottinghamshire. Still got the short A's. But we've got here. The last one was King John, buried at Worcester Cathedral, one of the few cathedrals in the country that has a royal burial. Also, Prince Arthur, who we will talk about later. For the we're just going to wait for the internet to catch up with me. There we go. It's called King John's Christmas. King John was not a good man. He had his little ways, and sometimes no one spoke to him for days and days and days. And men who came across him when walking in the town gave him a supercilious stare, or passed with noses in the air. And bad King John stood dumbly there, blushing beneath his crown. King John was not a good man, and no good friends had he. He stayed in every afternoon, but no one came to tea. And round about December, the cards upon his shelf, which wished him lots of Christmas cheer and fortune in the coming year, were never from his near and dear, but only from himself. King John was not a good man, yet he had his hopes and fears. They'd given him no present now for years and years and years. But every year at Christmas, while minstrels stood about, collecting tribute from the young for all the songs they might have sung, he stole away upstairs and hung a hopeful stocking out. King John was not a good man. He lived his life aloof. Alone he thought of us in particular, and signed it not Johannes R., but very humbly, Jack. "I want some crackers, and I want some candy. I think a box of chocolates would come in handy. I don't mind oranges. I do like nuts. And I should like a pocket knife that really cuts. And oh, Father Christmas, if you love me at all, bring me a big red India rubber ball." King John was not a good man. He wrote this message out and gat into his room again, descending by the spout. And all that night he lay there, a prey to hopes and fears. "I think that's him a-coming now," anxiety bedewed his brow. "He'll bring one present anyhow, the first I've had for years. Forget about the crackers and forget about the candy. I'm sure a box of chocolates would never come in handy. I don't like oranges. I don't want nuts. And I have got a pocket knife that almost cuts. But oh, Father Christmas, if you love me at all, bring me a big red India rubber ball." King John was not a good man. Next morning, lips with sticky sweets were smeared. King John said grimly, "As I feared, nothing again for me. I did want crackers, and I did want candy. I know a box of chocolates would come in handy. I do love oranges, and I did want nuts. I haven't got a pocket knife, not one that cuts. And oh, if Father Christmas had loved me at all, he would have brought me a big red India rubber ball." King John stood by the window and frowned to see below the happy bands of boys and girls all playing in the snow. A while he stood there watching and envying them all, when through the window, big and red, there hurtled by his royal head and bounced and fell upon the bed an India rubber ball. And oh, Father Christmas, my blessings on you fall for bringing him a big red India rubber ball. I don't know how historically accurate that is, but we'll probably let that slide, because we're going to turn now to the Plantagenets. Plantagenets named for the really for this section, we can only really go to Shakespeare. So we're going to start off with Richard II of Kings, this sceptred isle. And I'll start again in a moment once the internet's caught up with me. This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden, demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war. This happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in the silver sea, which serves it in the office of a wall, or as a moat defensive to a house against the envy of less happier lands. This blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England. We're going to fast forward through these Plantagenets and get to Henry V. Henry V, of course, famous for the Battle of Agincourt, where the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Historians correct me. So we've got we've just been killing French people for a long time. Got very good at it. We've got the Entente Cordiale now. We like French people now. So please don't take that any of what I just said seriously. One of the most famous speeches from Henry V, however, very patriotic, always comes up when Britain is in danger, and therefore probably a time for it now with the whole Brexit disaster. I say disaster because it's just there's a lot of uncertainty about it. This is not a political statement. I don't care whether you are Remain or Leave. I think it's somewhat irrelevant what your position is. We can all agree it's not going great at the moment. Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close up the wall with our English dead. In peace, there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility. But when the blast of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action, a terrible aspect. Let pry through the portage of the head like the brass cannon. Let the brow o'erwhelm it as fearfully as doth a galled rock o'erhang and jutty his confounded base, swilled with the wild and wasteful ocean. Now, set the teeth and stretch the nostril wide. Hold hard the breath and bend up every spirit to its full height. On, on, you noblest English, whose blood is fet from fathers of warproof. Fathers that, like so many Alexanders, have in these parts, from morn till even, fought and sheathed their swords for lack of argument. Dishonor not your mothers. Now attest that those whom you called fathers did beget you. Be copy now to men of grosser blood, and teach them how to war. And you, good yeomen, whose limbs were made in England, show us here the mettle of your pastures. Let us swear that you are worth your breeding, which I doubt not. For there is none of you so mean and base that hath not low noble lustre in your eyes. I can see you stand like greyhounds in the slips, straining upon the start. The game's afoot. Follow your spirit. And cheers. Now from a great British hero, Henry V, to a great English villain, Richard III. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barded steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking-glass, I, that am rudely stamped and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton, ambling nymph, I, that am curtailed, scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them. Why, I, in this weak, piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time, unless to spy my shadow in the sun and descant on my own deformity. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days. Plots I have laid, inductions dangerous, by drunken prophecies, libels, and dreams, to set my brother Clarence and the king in deadly hate the one against the other. And if King Edward be as true and just as I am subtle, false, and treacherous, this day should Clarence closely be mewed up about a prophecy which says that G of Edward Ayres the murderer shall be. Dive, thoughts, down to my soul. Here Clarence comes. Dying. The Wars of the Roses, of course, ended with Richard III dying at the hands of Henry VII and being buried in a car park in Leicester. It wasn't a car park at the time, but there is there entombed for now. York want him back, but York doesn't have a great claim on him other than him being of the House of York, apparently. So I heard the other day. It served him well so far. Anyway, Henry VII, who killed Richard III, of course, was the father of the infamous Henry VIII, who never sung, "Oh, I'm Henry VIII, I'm Henry VIII, I am." That is a fabrication. And just a silly song. Henry VIII, of course, is known worldwide for his loves and his passions and his somewhat unhealthy diet plan. He married 6 times. We all know, divorced, beheaded, and died for various reasons. Whatever you like. But Henry VIII is never given sufficient credit for being a very skilled theologian, a very skilled sportsman, and even a poet. And one of the poems that he wrote and set to music was this one, allegedly written for Anne Boleyn, his second wife, the first one he executed. Well, I'm going to read it as a poem. You can set it to music in your mind. It is, of course, Greensleeves. Alas, my love, you do me wrong, to cast me off discourteously, and I have loved you oh so long, delighting in your company. Green sleeves was my delight. Green sleeves, my heart of gold. Green sleeves was my heart of joy. And who but my lady Greensleeves? I have been ready at your hand to grant whatever thou wouldst crave. I have waged both life and land, your love and goodwill for to have. Greensleeves was my delight. Greensleeves, my heart of joy. Greensleeves was thy petticoat. Thy petticoat of slender white, with gold embroidered gorgeously. Thy petticoat of silk and white, and these I bought gladly. Greensleeves was my delight. Greensleeves, my heart of gold. Greensleeves was my heart of joy. Sleeves was my heart of joy. And who, bless me, and who but my lady Greensleeves? Slightly ruined by a sneeze at the end there, but you get the idea. Yeah, he wasn't a complete oaf as he is sometimes portrayed. He was a very intelligent, great sportsman. It said he invented games and he did all sorts of things, but what he's mostly remembered for is being a womanizer. Shame, really, because he did other things. However, my aim today was to take us from the rule of Rome to the rule of the Tudors, and with Henry VIII, the father of the patriarch of the Tudor age, leaving Henry VII out of it, because he was the father of Lizzie I, Elizabeth I. And next time we do this, all being well, we'll go into the Stuart era, with and have some fun. Right, for now, thank you very much for sticking with me. I'm sorry about the internet connection, keeps pausing and doing all sorts of dreadful things. I apologize. That's all I can say. I'll try and get it fixed, but I'm making no promises. Until then, until next time, thank you very much for joining me. Goodbye.